All right, guys, welcome back. It's been a while since I made a tutorial, but I am really excited about this one. So this is for all of my 7th and 8th graders. We are going to be starting this Make Yourself a Monster project. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the instructions and how I'm going to be grading you. And then I'm going to be showing you guys how I made my example. Now, when you go and make your example or your project, you may do it different than how I'm showing you right now, but this tutorial will at the very least give you an idea of the different tools and techniques that I used so that you can decide for yourself what tools and techniques you're going to use to create your own monster photo manipulation. So let's go ahead and take a look at my example that I made. So I'm going to be remaking this today. I already made it last week, but I'm going to be remaking it. It may not look exactly the same, just like whenever you try to recreate something that you've done before, sometimes you just do it a little bit differently, and that's just what happens. But I'm going to try to keep this as close to the first one I did as possible. So you guys are going to be turning yourselves into monsters, which will be a fun activity, I think, for a lot of you guys who are celebrating Halloween coming up next week. So let's go ahead and talk about the instructions. The assignment is to create a monster photo manipulation by blending a photograph of yourself together with different photos into a fictional monster design. You will add a background photograph to show where your monster lives. So you're going to watch this tutorial and see how I did mine, and then you are going to start your own. You're going to name it Your Name Monster. Use the pen tool and eraser tools to cut out your photos and blend them together. Choose a background picture to show where your monster lives. And then you're going to save that. I want you to save it as both a PSD file and a JPEG file. So that way, if you need to go back and add anything to it, you have that PSD file that you can go back to. And you won't have to start all over because that's never fun. All right. So let's talk about your rubric really quick. I do have a rubric for this assignment, and it's going to kind of tell you guys how I'm going to be grading it. The first one is that you are naming your file correctly with your name and monster as a JPEG or a PSD. I do want you turning in the JPEG, though. That is the file that I want you to turn in. If you are having issues saving files and downloading them or uploading them, just communicate that with me, and I will not take points away from you on that. Photos. I am going to be grading you on whether or not you used 5 or more photographs to create your manipulation. So these do have to be photographs. They cannot be cartoons. They cannot be paintings or drawings or computer graphics. I need you guys to use photographs for your assignment. And you need to use 5 or more. And that includes the picture of yourself that you're turning into a monster. The next thing I'm going to be grading you guys on is that you seamlessly blended your pictures together to create a convincing monster. So this is going to be all about how well you blended your pictures together to make your monster design. You want to make sure you're blending and using the eraser tool and even the feather tool to give your pictures a really, really good look that they are like going together and they're blending. I'm going to be grading you guys on how effectively you used the digital art tools and programs to create this photo manipulation. It's basically like how well your understanding of those tools shows in your final design. And then I'm also going to be grading you on whether or not you included a background photo to show me where your monster lives. All right. So make sure you are including all of those things in your design. So I'm going to go ahead and open Photopea, and I will start working on my photo manipulation so you can see how I put mine together. So the first thing I started with was the photograph that I'm using of myself that I turned myself into a monster with. And I took this picture a few weeks ago, but it's still a nice clear picture. It shows all the details of my face, nice and neat. And so if you are taking a picture of yourself, just make sure it's a nice clear picture and you can see all of your facial features. You can even make faces or stuff if you're planning on like turning yourself into a monster. You can use your own expressions to add to that. So let me show you the pictures I'm going to be using. I have some snake scales that I'm going to be using for my face. I have a skeleton that I'm going to be using the tooth from to create a like set of fangs for my mouth. I have this cat's eyes that I'm going to be using to replace my own eyes to make them look creepy and monstrous. And then, of course, I'm going to have all these snakes. I'm creating a Medusa monster, which is a lady who has snakes for hair. So I need all of these snakes to make my head look like it's got snakes for hair. And then this is the picture that I'm using for my background to show where my creature or my monster lives. So Medusa is a monster from Greek mythology. So I chose some Greek looking columns in the background to show that she lives in somewhere in Greece because that's where her myth is from. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'll talk to you guys a little bit about what I'm doing, and that will hopefully give you guys a good idea of how you're going to start your own photo manipulation project. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the picture that I found of scales, and I am going to use this to show some scales on my skin, like my skin is kind of slowly turning to scales. So I'm going to use the move tool to just play around with this picture that I found and move it to where I want it to be on the picture. And I think I'm actually going to undo that. And I want to just cover my face with these scales. And then I think I'm going to make another copy of this scale image. And that's going to be for my neck that I'll do maybe after I do the face, just in case I don't like the look of the scales. So let me go ahead. I'm going to duplicate this layer. So I'm just right clicking on it and hitting duplicate. And so you see that made a copy of it. And I'm going to turn one of those off and I'm going to save it for later. And now I'm going to work on turning this into scales on my face. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rasterize this picture by right clicking here and hitting rasterize, or I can always go over to my layer window right here on the menu and I can select rasterize there. And that will turn that photograph into pixels that I can now edit and delete. I'm also going to go to my opacity for this picture, and I'm going to turn my opacity down to 50%, which will make that layer with my snake scales on it see-through, which can kind of give me a better idea of like where my facial features are. So I know where I want to start deleting or erasing parts of those scales to make it look like my skin has scales on it. So now I'm just going to like move it around a little bit more now that I can kind of see where my face is. And that looks pretty good. I think I might make it just a little bit longer. I'm going to hit enter. And now I'm going to start using my eraser tool to erase the parts of the scales away from my face where I want my face and eyes and nose to show through. So I'm going to select my eraser tool right here. And I'm going to go up to where I can change what kind of brush tip I'm using. Just like the brush tool, when you have the eraser, you can change the texture and size and opacity of the tip of that eraser. So I'm going to find a soft edge brush for my eraser, and I like this one right here. It's called Soft Mechanical 24 pixels. And so when I click on it, I'll have a soft brush that is 24 pixels large. And that's a little small, so I'm going to use that bracket tool down on my keyboard right next to the letter P to make my brush tool bigger. So you can see how that's getting bigger now. And now I'm just going to start erasing the parts of the scales here that I don't need because this part's kind of outside my face. So I know that I don't need that part of the picture of those scales. So I'm just going to go around and erase this. And I am using a mouse to control where my eraser tool goes, and that makes it a little bit easier for me to do. But if you're using a touchpad on your laptop or your Chromebook, just, be patient and do the best you can. So now I'm kind of just going all the way around, and I'm erasing all of this picture except for the parts that are on my face. So now we can kind of see when I turn the layer on and off, it's just my face there. And I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. And I'm actually going to go up here, and you can see at the top of the screen when I have my eraser selected, I can control the opacity and the flow of my eraser. And what this means is that if I take the opacity and turn it down to like 50%, it will only erase this at 50% opacity. So it will give me a little bit more control over how much of what I'm erasing actually gets erased. It's, if you think about it like a real eraser, it's like you're erasing really, really lightly just to slightly erase it instead of pushing down really, really hard and trying to erase like everything that's there. That's just another one of those controls that you can use to make this a little bit more intuitive when you're using the eraser tool and the brush tool. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to erase the parts that are kind of above my eye right here. So my eye is kind of showing through, and I want to erase inside the whites of my eyes. And I'm just going to keep erasing bits of my face until my eyes and my facial features are kind of showing through. And I like the ratio of how much skin is showing compared to how much scales are showing. All right, so I think I like the way that looks now. I'm just gonna turn it on and off just so you can see the difference between the scales and where I left them. And again, this is kind of what I started with originally right here was these scales. And I turned the opacity down, and then I just slowly erased until I was happy with the way it looked. I was kind of trying to go for like a little V-shaped kind of pattern right here on the forehead. So I'm just gonna erase just a little bit more of those scales just to kind of clean that up a little bit. But I think that looks really nice, and I'm pretty happy with it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to my next thing. I think I'm going to go ahead and find my cat eyes, and I'm going to add my cat eyes to my picture to make it look like my eyes are really creepy. So I'm going to do this by using the pen tool, and I am just going to trace one of these eyes. And let me go ahead and turn the fill off so I can see what I'm tracing. And I mostly just want the black part of the outside of the eye and the yellow inside. And then I will cut this out. So I've got my area traced right here. So I'm going to right click to make a selection. and hit OK. And so now I just want the inside of the eye, so I am going to select inverse. And now that selects everything that's outside of that trace that I just made around the eye. And I'm going to delete the background from that picture. So all I have left is just the cat's eye. So I need to rasterize the cat's picture first. And I'm going to hit delete or backspace. And now I just have my cat's eye. So now I'm going to deselect it, and I'm going to use the move tool to move this down. I think I've got my shape selected instead of the eyes. Let me undo that. There we go. So now I'm moving the eyeball. Oh, it keeps wanting to do that. If it keeps giving you problems like that, just kind of like take that shape and just kind of move it down here so it's not bugging you. There we go. Okay, now I can move it. And now I'm going to decrease the size so it matches up with the shape of my eyeball. And I'm going to zoom in so I can see a little bit more closely what I'm working with. Because sometimes when you're zoomed way out and you're working with a tiny little piece, it can be hard to move it around and make it look just right. All right, so this looks pretty good. It looks like it's matching up with the size of my eye. Really quick, I can turn it on and off to kind of just check, what my eye it looks like behind it. But I like how that looks. And now before I finish it, I'm just going to take my eraser tool and I'm going to make it really small. And remember, I have the opacity turned down to about 50%. So I'm just going to keep it like that. And I'm going to use this eraser tool to just go around some of the edges of my eyeball and just erase a little bit to make it blend a little bit more realistically in with my eye. And I think it makes a really big difference when you do that. Like for right here, where a little bit of my eyelid is kind of hidden, I'm going to erase that part of the eyeball so it looks like this eye is fitting inside of my own eyeball right here, like underneath my eyelid and my eyelashes. And I just think that makes it look a whole lot more realistic when you do that. I'm going to do it up here too, where the eyelashes are kind of coming over the eyeball a little bit. All right. And you see just these little tiny amounts of erasing bits and pieces of the eyeball just make it blend and make it look more and more like this is actually my eyeball. So I'm going to zoom out now so you can see how that looks. I'm pretty happy with that. Let me see, I'm going to use my move tool and just kind of like nudge it over just a little bit, I think. And I like it. I think it looks good. All right, so now rather than getting another picture of the cat and just kind of going through the whole process all over again, I'm actually just going to take this cat eye and I'm going to name it Cat Eye, just so I know what's there. And I'm going to name this one Scales, because remember, naming your layers helps you keep everything nice and organized. All right, so now I'm going to make a copy of my cat eye layer. So I'm going to go to duplicate layer, and now I have two of these. So I'm going to take one, and I'm going to use the move tool to move it. And just kind of drag it over here so you can see I have two now. And I'm just going to drag it across like this to just flip it so it's kind of going the opposite direction like a mirrored image. And now I'm just going to stick that in my other eye and adjust it until it looks good, until I like the way it looks. Let me try and get rid of that little border there. I think I have to hit enter, don't I? Yep. All right. Let's zoom in a little bit. And that looks pretty good. I think I'm just going to nudge it and move it just a little bit more because I think it got a little wide on me. There we go. Hit enter. And I like it. I think that looks great. So I'm going to zoom back out and keep working. Ooh, creepy. Love it. Okay. So now let's see what we have next. I've got all of these snakes. So let's go ahead and start cutting out these snakes so I can start making my hair. I'll turn all of these snakes back on. And I think I'm going to turn these layers off too, just so I can see my snakes for right now. Because I'm going to need to cut all of them out. So I think I already started cutting out the snake right here on this layer. So let me just kind of bring this down right here. So this snake had all like white background on it. So I used the magic wand tool to go in and just delete all of the white background from the snake. And as you can see, if I zoom in, there's still a little bit of white left. So I'm going to go ahead and erase that now. And this picture is already rasterized, so I don't have to do that because I did that earlier. But I'm going to find my magic wand tool right here. It's located underneath this object selection. It kind of looks like a little bean inside of a dotted line. So when I right click on that, I can find my magic wand. And the magic wand lets me select anything that is a similar color. So if I select like right here where all this white is, it will select everything that is white. And now I can just hit backspace to delete that area, and all of the white from that snake is now deleted. So if I unselect it, kind of look closer, and you can see I've deleted all the white from that. So that's an easy way to remove the background if you have a photograph of something like a plant or an animal where it has a white background. But if you are using a picture like my other snakes that I have underneath this guy, where it has a background, this is where cutting things out with a pen tool is going to be the technique you're going to want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this snake out. And I like this one because it's like a really cute little snake with his tongue sticking out. And I really wanted to have that little detail. So I'm going to choose my pen tool. And I'm just going to zoom in. And I'm going to start cutting out my snake by tracing it with my pen tool first. And then deleting the background after I've made a selection. So I'm going to start right up here with his little tongue, his little forked tongue, and just do some straight lines to trace around this forked tongue area. And then I'm going to start coming down and creating my curved lines to start tracing this tongue. So remember that if you are having issues getting rid of your anchor right here where you can kind of control the curve, you can just do dotted lines. Like right here, I'm just going to do dotted lines to trace this area. That's totally fine. Just remember the smaller or shorter lines you create, the more accurate your trace will be, and it won't look as geometric as it can be when you just do straight lines. But if you can make your curves and you can get rid of your anchors to control your curves, use that because it makes a nice trace. So you see I'm just following along until I've traced all the way around the snake. All right, so now I've got my snake traced all the way around with the pen tool. So I'm just going to zoom out so I can see the whole thing. I'm going to make sure I have my pen tool selected, and then I'm going to right click inside of the area that I just traced and hit make a selection and hit OK. And so now I've got that area selected. So I need to make sure that I'm clicking on that picture, and I need to rasterize that picture. And then I'm just going to hit, well, actually, before I hit delete, I need to go back and I need to select inverse so I can select the background instead of the snake. So that way, when I hit backspace, I will delete the background. And there we go. Just a little snake all by himself on that layer. All right, so I'm just gonna go and do that same thing to all of my snake pictures. So I have cut all of them out and I just have the snake and no background. All right, so now I've got all of my snakes cut out. Just show you really quick. Here they all are. And if I grab each one of them, I can move them around. There's again that's my shape right there. So let me go ahead and just get rid of these shapes. Just pull them down here where they can't bug me. Whenever you have layers that you're not using and they're kind of getting in the way, you can just pull them down to a lower part of the list so they're not bugging you. And now I can go ahead and select my different snakes and kind of move them around and put them in different areas. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start arranging my snakes together on top of the head of my picture and creating something that looks like hair out of these snakes. All right, so I just shrank down all of those layers to give myself a little bit more room to work with on top of my head to start adding these layers to make my hair. So you see, I'm just tilting and turning these snakes and resizing them. And I like the idea of maybe using this black and yellow snake to create the main shape of my hair. So I'm just going to like move this snake around until I like where it looks. I think I might tilt him back a little bit. I like the idea of having this snake head like kind of right there in the middle of my forehead, kind of like a decoration. And then I am going to just duplicate this layer several times. So I have several pictures of this black and yellow snake. And then I'm just going to kind of twist and turn and bundle them all together to make something that looks like hair. Remember, another option to create layers or duplicates of your layers is to just hold Control and Alt while you have your Move tool selected. And then when you drag that picture, it will make a copy of it. So let me show you that really quick. So see, I'm holding Control and Alt down at the same time. So when I click and drag on that picture, it makes another copy. So I can kind of just keep making copies until I feel like I've got enough to create the shape of this hair. Okay. All right, this is starting to look really good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer underneath all of these snakes. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit new layer. And it's layer 4. And I'm just going to make sure that it's underneath all of these snake copies that I made. So you can see that it's underneath there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a brush tool. And I am going to paint the gaps here where my black snakes are kind of all bundled together. And you can see these little white gaps where the background is showing through. And I'm going to choose a paintbrush and paint this area black to bring all of these snake bodies together and make it look cohesive. So I just chose a regular brush tip. And I'm just going to start painting. So you can see my layer is underneath all of these other pictures of snakes. So the black that I'm painting is going to go underneath those snakes. So I'm just going to go in and paint around until I like how all of these snakes look together. And I get rid of all of those gaps in the background to make them look all like one piece of snake. All right, so that's how I did that. There's a few more bits of white showing through. All right, so now I'm starting to really kind of like feel like this is starting to look like hair, but I want it to look more and more like hair. So I'm going to start adding more snakes from the ones that I cut out and arranging them to make it look like different snakes are all wrapped up in this hair coming out of the top of my head. All right, so now that I've got all of my snakes arranged on my head the way I like them, I think it looks really cool. So now I'm going to start using my eraser tool with the soft edge, and I'm just gonna start going into all of those different snake pictures and just start erasing bits and pieces of them to make them blend in together, to make them look all like one cohesive hair piece there. All right, so now that I've arranged all of my snakes the way I want to, I'm going to go back to my black area on my separate layer and use my brush tool to just add any black to any gaps that are still showing to make sure that all of these snakes look like they're all together in one piece. All right, so I like how the snakes look. My only problem now is that I see a little bit of my hair here. If I move to my arrow, I see a little bit of my hair kind of showing through right here. So to fix that, all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna select all of my pictures of snakes all together. And to do that, I'm just gonna click on the first one right here at the top of my list. And then I'm gonna go down to the very last picture and the shadow, and I'm going to hold my shift button down. And when I click on that, it selects all of the layers in between the first layer I clicked and the last layer I clicked. So you can see all of these layers are now selected, which means I can now move and rearrange all of those layers at the same time. So I'm just going to nudge all of these snakes down a little lower on my head until it covers up the hair. And that looks great. I love how that looks. All right. I think one more thing I want to do, I want to move this green snake up just a little bit because you can see a little bit of that flower kind of sticking through. So I'm going to find that green snake and I'm going to move him up, and then I think this will be good for the snakes. All right, so that was definitely the hardest part of creating this photo manipulation, was putting all these snakes together to create that look of hair. So now I'm going to start erasing pieces of my picture of my face to get rid of some of the parts that I don't need. So I'm going to go in here, get my eraser, and I'm going to turn my opacity up to 100% now because I'm just erasing parts of the background that I don't want anymore. So it's okay if I erase all of it at once. I'm going to keep that soft edge though, so that it will just make it a little bit easier to not go too far overboard into my face there. All right, so I'm going to leave my earrings because I think that they're really cool and I think that they kind of fit in with the look of this monster. Like, I feel like these might be earrings that Medusa actually wore. So I'm going to leave the earrings. I'm going to erase everything else that I don't want to show in this picture. All right, I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to go back and I think I'm going to add some scales to my neck here. So I'm going to go back up to that second picture of the scales that I left, and I'm going to use my move tool to move that down, and I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. I don't want those scales to be so big. So I'm going to use my move tool to resize this picture. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did before, where I'm going to turn the opacity on the scales down to 50% so I can see the picture of myself behind it. And I'm going to zoom in. And I am going to just erase the parts of this picture that I don't need, and I'm going to leave the parts that are on the neck. I need to rasterize it, so I'm going to go ahead and rasterize it. And now I'm just going to start deleting everything on this picture of these scales that I don't need. Make my brush smaller in the areas that I need to go over. I probably could have used the pen tool to trace the shape of my neck if I really wanted to, but I think this is going to give me more of the results that I'm looking for. So I'm going to go with this technique. Again, there's so many different ways you can do something in programs like Photoshop and Photopea, and it really comes down to you as the artist to kind of choose how you want to use the tools that you've been given. Just like you would with a paintbrush or a pencil, there's a bunch of different ways that you can use those tools to create the art that you're trying to create. Choosing the best tool for the job is really the key there. All right, I think that looks pretty good. So now I've got some scales on my neck there. And I think I'm gonna go and I'm just gonna shrink my tool down all the way. I just wanna add just a little bit of like a shadow right here, so it kind of separates where the part of the scaled from the chin of my face, kind of like separates from the neck, so you can kind of tell them apart and they don't blend in, so it doesn't look like I have no chin or no neck. All right, so that looks pretty good to me. And now I'm going to use the pen tool and I'm going to trace my lips and I'm going to make my lips look darker. I'm going to show you how I do that. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in and I'm going to use my pen tool to start tracing the shape of my lips. I'm going to start right here at my top lip and just start tracing up around that shape. All right, so I just traced the shape of my lips. And I'm going to right click and make a selection and hit OK. So now that area of inside of it is selected. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to get my brush tool. And I'm just going to choose like a dark kind of like purplish brown color. And I'm going to just kind of add like a bit of like a darker shade to that lip. So let me just kind of look around and see what kind of color I want to use. I think up here would be good. Those are a little too, let's try it here. Okay, I think I'm gonna go for like a brown, because if I use a brown and turn the opacity down, I will have a little bit of the pink from my actual picture of my lips showing through. Okay, so I'm just going to paint that over so you can see how it's turning kind of a brown color, but you can still see some of the color of my lips showing through. And then I'm even going to go further and deselect this, and I'm going to use the pen tool, and I'm going to trace a smaller shape right here, which is just kind of like that little dark shadow that you can kind of see where the lips are kind of a little bit open, just to add a little bit more, detail to make it look like a mouth. And I'm going to right click and hit make selection and hit OK and go back to my layer where I just drew those lips on, and I'm just going to choose a black color now and hit OK. And I'm just going to paint inside of that little area and hit deselect. And now it looks like the lips are a little bit darker in color just from drawing a little bit and having the opacity turned down so you can see a little bit of that photograph showing through behind it. All right, I think that looks pretty good. It's almost like I kind of added lipstick, using digital tools. All right, so this is almost finished. Let me remember if there's anything else. Oh, that's right. I need to add the fangs. I had these really cool fangs. So let me go back to, before I do that, let me show you how I organize all of my snake pictures. So you can see I have so many of these snake pictures. So I am actually going to select all of those pictures by clicking at the top of the first one on the list. And I'm going to go down to the last one on the list, which is my shadow. And I'm going to hold Shift to select all of those snakes pictures together. And then down here at the bottom of the toolbar, there's a new folder button that you can push, and when you have all of those layers selected and you select new folder, it puts all of those layers into a folder, and it kind of helps keep it organized so you don't have like all of these layers in a big old list on your window. So if you see right here it says folder 1 and I click on it, I can see all of those snake pictures inside that folder. It's just kind of like a technique where you can keep your window of your layer list a little bit more organized. All right, so that's a little bit easier to look at for me. You'll find while you're working on these Photoshop or Photopea projects, the more pictures and more details you add, the more layers you get. And that's fine as long as you can kind of keep them organized and keep them from confusing you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and find my picture that I'm using for my teeth, which is that skeleton picture that I found. And I'm just going to put it up here so I can see it. And I'm going to use the pen tool to just trace that tooth that I liked. And I'm not going to trace all the way up to like the top where that part of the skeleton is because I don't really want that little edge right there. So I'm just going to cut right below it and just get the part that I want to use. And I think we're gonna make this tooth a little bit sharper than it appears in the picture. And I'm just gonna do that just by kind of cutting out the little edge right there and just making it a little bit sharper. All right, so I'm going to zoom in on that just so you can see a little bit better of how I traced it. And I'm going to right click, make a selection, hit OK. So now the inside is selected. I'm going to go to select inverse to select the opposite of what I just traced and hit backspace after I rasterize it. And now I have that fang. So let me zoom out again. And I'm going to use my move button to move that fang down. And it looks like the fang is underneath my face, so I need to make sure I drag that layer up above my face so I can see it. Actually, it was right there. Okay, it's good. So I'm moving it down, and obviously I need to make it much smaller because it's way too big. So I'll zoom in and just make that smaller and just move it around until it looks like it fits really well. That looks pretty good. I think I might make it a little bit longer too. All right, I'm gonna hit enter. And now I need to make my second one. So I'm just gonna make a copy of this layer by holding Control and Alt down at the same time. And now I'm going to drag it and that'll make another duplicate. And I will just take this and pull it in the opposite direction so it creates a reflected version and put that where I think it will look good. And hit enter. And now I'm just gonna go in and zoom in a little bit more, maybe adjust this. And I'm just gonna use my eraser tool one more time just to erase a little bit of the edge of this tooth so it blends in. And just like that. Okay, I don't really want to leave any hard edges. I want this tooth to blend in really well. I'm going to back up a little bit and try that one more time because I think I took too much away. All right. And then I'm going to choose my other tooth and get my eraser and just erase just a little bit of it to make it blend in to look like it's kind of coming out of my mouth a little bit. A little too much on that side. So, again, just keep going. Just keep hitting that undo button or that step back button just to try something again if it doesn't look quite right. So now I'm just going to make sure I like where they look. I think I'm going to raise this one up just a little bit more. And I like it. All right, so let's zoom out and see how it looks. Ooh, creepy. All right, so I'm almost done. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my background picture to show where my creature lives. So I'm going to pull that up here and put it behind my picture of my face, turn it on so now I can see it. And I'm just going to, I think, move it around. I think I tilted it a little bit this way to make it more dramatic. Things that are diagonal can be more dramatic. Have you ever tried taking a selfie of yourself where you tilt your phone and it's a little sideways and it looks a little bit more interesting and dramatic that way? If not, something you could try for the future. All right, so now that looks pretty cool with the columns behind her. And I think the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add one more layer and put that behind the picture. And I'm going to use the fill button, the paint bucket tool, and I'm just going to fill that whole layer with black. And it's going to blend in with the background, and that looks pretty good. I think the only thing I want to do now is when I zoom in, I see a little bit of that photograph left over, and I think I'm just going to go back and erase it just a little bit more to get rid of it. And that will help it blend in a little bit more with the background. And then I'm going to call this finished, I think. So that is how I made myself into a monster. And you guys are just going to be using this as inspiration to help you decide what tools and techniques you're going to use and the processes you're going to combine all your photographs together. So have tons of fun with this and let me know if you need help with anything. All right, have fun, guys.